U.S. history. Happy week 7. 7 weeks. What? Crazy to think about. Starting the week off with some good old 80s rock and roll from Kiss. I remember this song being on the warm-up music for our state basketball team in 1985 when Eagle Valley High School won state basketball. So this song has a really nostalgic feel for me. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and lower it and get started today. And so we are continuing to talk about the Cold War. Just a little salutation for you on this week 7, talking about May. Can you believe it's May? This week we hit May. It's going to be May. And just about some history of a holiday that we kind of don't do much more anymore with, and that's called May Day on May 1st. So it gives you a little brief history of that and kind of a cool little tradition that's kind of gone away in our society. But you could bring it back. So let's go ahead and jump in to week 7. You can see here's our participation for this week. You have a 2 to 3 sentence response for our participation. This is the dice roll for last week. So if you want to know which assignment I'll be grading all this week from last week to put into PowerSchool, there it is. That's the dice roll. And here is Monday's work. And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about more perspectives of the Cold War and some things going on around the world that affects the head-to-head conflict that we are seeing between the U.S. and USSR, the cold conflict. And we're also going to talk about these people, the Rosenbergs, and what they did to get themselves executed. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with our lecture, and then I'm going to talk about an assignment that we have. Okay, so let's jump on in to the Cold War and causes and effects. So once again, you're grabbing your notes. We have a small amount of notes to add. Last time we looked at perspectives of the USSR. Today, we're looking at perspectives of the Middle East. And technically, you can still call them 3. Okay, we're just changing the subject area and not looking at the USSR. We're still looking at the Middle East. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about what happened in the Middle East during this whole Cold War and why the Middle East will be a hot spot of the Cold War eventually. Okay. So let's talk about this place called Palestine. And I'm going to go ahead and move me out of the way because I've got a number of pictures that I want to show you on the side of the slides. So in 1945, the United States and the United Nations, because remember the United Nations was formed after World War II ended, that whole idea of creating a community and committee of the nations to come together to help try and solve the world's problems before they lead to war. So in 1945, the United States and the United States nations wanted to divide this area known as Palestine. And you can see it's right to the northeast of Egypt, to the west of Jordan, to the west of Syria. Many of you have probably heard of Palestine, but maybe don't know exactly where it was. It no longer exists. It is now known as Israel. That's probably why. So they wanted to take the country known as Palestine at the time and cut it up into making Jewish states. See, the United Nations and the United States felt that the Jewish people had suffered enough. One of the reasons the Jewish people in history have always been persecuted is they've been a wandering people. They've never had a state or a country of their own because they've never had like a kingdom of their own. And so the United States and the United Nations wanted to create a country for the Jewish people, a safe place for the Jewish people. So that what happened to them in Germany and Poland and, Yugoslavia or Austria-Hungary doesn't happen again. And so the thing about this, though, is it sounds like a great idea, but if you're going to create a nation or a country for a group of people, you're going to have to move another group of people out, Okay. It's like me saying, all right, this whole room here is Miss Rivera's, but we feel really bad for my next door neighbors, and now they're going to get part of this room. Okay. So that's, of course, going to disenfranchise a group of people. And this is where we start to see more tension. Okay. So here we have what was known as Palestine. Okay. And what they wanted to do was take these orange areas and make them Jewish living lands, and then the Palestinian living lands, which most of those people were Arab, which most of those people are Muslim. So two very different religions living throughout this area known as Palestine. Well, in 1948, a fighting begins between the Israelis and the Arabs, obviously fighting for land to live on and call their own. And of course, the Israelis were backed by the UN and the United States, and the Palestinians or the Arabs were not. And so who else could come in and kind of back up the Palestinians? You guessed it, the USSR. See, the USSR felt it was smart to back up the Palestinians, because why would they want Israeli backed by US in their sphere of influence? Okay, so if you allow the Israelis to set up a Jewish state, you're kind of allowing their best friend, the United States, to come over and influence policy. And that, again, is once again the scare that the USSR was like, we don't want democracy and capitalism that close to us, keeping an eye on us. Okay, so again, here's that tension, but not really fighting directly with each other, but indirectly in the Middle East. So we can see, here's how it happened. If I move myself for a second here, there we go, 1947, okay? So we can see what was actually Jewish settlements in the country of Palestine and what was Palestinian land. And then by 1947, once the UN gets involved, the United Nations gets involved, we can see a lot more Israeli area, and the Palestinian area, very, very small. Also, the city of Jerusalem, which is biblically very important, was controlled by the UN now. Then we see that Jerusalem is kind of divided in half, part controlled by the Muslims, part controlled by the Jewish. Very important biblical place for both Muslims, Jewish, and Christians. And then, of course, we see Palestine's area is getting much smaller. We have this little strip here, which is very important, is getting smaller for the Palestinians feeling as if this isn't fair, you're pushing us out. And then to the point for 2005 here, we can see that Palestinian areas are very small. The Gaza Strip here still remain the same, that they have control of that, but Israel is pretty much now Israeli controlled. All right. So that's where a lot of the fighting is going to ensue between the Arabs and the Israelis over living lands, with the Israelis backed by the US and the UN, and the Palestinians backed mostly for majority of this time up until about the 1980s and 90s by the USSR. All right, so we're going to go here. So now, here's the thing that we need to understand about that area, Israel or Palestine, whichever you refer to it as during what period. I mean, it stops being kind of Palestine after 1948. So more than 700,000 Palestinians would be made homeless by this creation of an Israeli state. And what we also need to understand is there might have been an undercurrent type of motive for the US to get involved, because this is an area that is heavy in oil resources. Okay, so when we look at this area right here, we can see this area is very heavy in oil resources. It would be nice to have a friend in this area so that we can help influence and help gain decisions that would help us to gain more oil to build our country. So this is one of the other kind of hot spots of the Cold War, of the US kind of fighting the USSR, and of course, matter perspective of what you see in terms of who was in the right place and who was in the wrong place. All right, guys, that's the end of our lecture. We'll look at Latin America on Wednesday. Okay, so now your dice assignment. So what we're going to do is, not this. I accidentally went to the wrong video thing. All right, so what we're going to do is we have this worksheet, okay? Now, you guys have been used to me talking about generalizations. Half the time, you guys probably don't even listen to me talk about generalizations because you're like, oh, Ms. Rivera, this is just something that you're doing to introduce the unit. And if you remember, we have this unit organizer with generalizations. Now, these are just what generalizations are. You're not going to use these, okay? But generalizations are broad statements that can be applied to any time period in history. So, for instance, we see America's relationship with other countries has been influenced at different times by a sense of mission, by values, and by self-interest. We just talked about the Middle East. We were influenced. Our relationship with Palestine or a relationship with Israel was influenced by a sense of mission, maybe giving the Israelis a homeland, by our values, and by maybe our self-interest of oil. So you can see how that generalization fits that particular situation, but it also could have fit World War II, World War I, okay? So that's what a generalization is. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be making your own generalizations. So let's take a look at number 1. These are all true facts, okay, about the Cold War, and you're going to make some generalizations on them. So, fact number 1 of question number 1. In 1947, a poll revealed that Americans favored friendly relations with the Soviet Union. That's a fact. So our people here in the United States actually wanted to be friends with the Soviet Union as early as 1947. Then, 1948, a poll revealed that 76% of Americans believed the Soviet Union was out to rule the world. So within a year, people went from saying, yes, we should be friends with the Soviet Union, to no, they're scary. They're trying to rule the world with their communist ideas. So your job is to write a generalization about that. Let's do it together. In a short period of time, people can change their ideas about one another very quickly if they are suspicious. Think about that. That generalization fits that situation. In a short period of time, 1 year, people can change their ideas about their relationship with others if they have suspicions. That could apply to you and your friends even. That's a generalization that in a short period of time, your relationship maybe with your best friend could change if you're suspicious of something. Maybe you're suspicious that they've been cheating off of you. Okay? So see how we've made a generalization that can fit anywhere but fits these two facts in addition? So you're making a generalization from 2 factual statements. This is a critical thinking skill. Okay, guys? So it is going to be difficult. You may want to sit down with a friend and Zoom and talk about it, but don't copy each other. Okay? All right, guys. If you have questions, see me by email me or hit back on the remind. Okay? All right, guys. Have a great week 7, and we'll talk to you guys soon. I'm going to leave us with some kiss. Bye.